So thank you all very much for coming to the 2026 Garrison Lecture. I'm by the way, I'm Josh Galper, I think I know most of you. I'm a professor here. I'm going to serve as the MC. I'm going to say a couple quick sort of overview words. I'm going to pass the mic to Dean Anderson. Then I will introduce Doug Kysar, who is our guest of honor tonight. So first, one thing that I think we can't go without mentioning is I want to congratulate pretty much everybody in the room for the 6th year in a row of the #1 U.S. News and World Report's environmental law ranking. Obviously, this is very exciting, and don't tell anybody outside of this room because I'm not sure it's true. I think I heard that there is no school that has held the #1 ranking in a specialty ranking for 6 years in a row in any specialty ranking. Now, that may not be true. I heard it, and I don't, but there you have it. So, we are very excited about that. And rankings, like they sometimes mean something and sometimes don't. One thing I will say about the specialty rankings that many people don't know is that they are based entirely off of peer review scores, peer reputation scores. So it actually does mean something. It's not based on an esoteric metric like the number of books in our library or something like that. So I think that means a lot. And it means that the students and staff and faculty have done a lot of work to impress people around the country, which I think we should all be very proud of. So for that ranking, the consistency of that ranking, and for this particular event, there's a bunch of people that I want to thank. So let me start first and foremost with Lorraine Rubich and Annie Olson, who are our environmental program assistant director. I don't know, Lorraine never likes being thanked. And Annie Olson, who is the environmental program manager, who's over here, I also don't think likes being thanked. Also, our environmental law fellow, Kieran Chahal, who I saw running around, but she's here somewhere. Kieran is here somewhere. There she is. The entire program and events team, the entire IT and cleaning teams, because without these folks, we couldn't do these events, and we certainly couldn't do back-to-back events that put a lot of work on them. Also, of course, a professor and executive director of the environmental law program, Chinthia Vithanagay, and Professor Katie Q, who's the faculty director of the environmental law program. Thank you all very, very much. The last two things before I turn the mic over to Dean Anderson, one of is that we have a videographer here tonight. So if you don't want, I'm a moment too slow. If you don't want to be on video, he'll be here for a minute or two. You can run out for just the next couple of minutes. But if you don't mind, you're all Gen Zers. You don't mind, I know. But if you do mind, now is the time to step out. So after the talk today, there's going to be a brief Q&A session with Professor Kysar. So as he's talking, please hold your questions till the end because we will have time for that. If you want to share your thoughts about today's event, stay connected with us for the future. If you are not already, please follow us, tag us, etc. Pace Enviro Law and Haub Enviro Law. Now, finally, I'm going to pass the mic to Dean Anderson.
Thanks, Professor Galperin. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to the #1 environmental law program in the galaxy. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Horace Anderson. I'm dean here at the Elisabeth Haub School of Law at Pace University. And it's my pleasure to welcome you once again to the Lloyd K. Garrison Lecture. We're honored to have Professor Doug Kysar with us to deliver this year's lecture. He is the Joseph M. Field 55 Professor of Law at Yale Law School and is also a Haub visiting scholar. Today, his lecture will focus on the complex possibilities and controversies surrounding alternative proteins in our food system. The Lloyd K. Garrison Lecture on Environmental Law was established in 1995 in memory of Lloyd Garrison, a noted lawyer and champion of civil rights and civil liberties. Nearly 60 years ago, Lloyd Garrison and his associate, Albert Butzel of Paul Weiss, Rifkin, Wharton, and Garrison, won a landmark decision to preserve Storm King Mountain on the Hudson River. This victory for the Scenic Hudson Preservation Conference did more than just safeguard an area of unique beauty and major historical importance. It also inaugurated what we today recognize as the field of environmental law. Rooted in the 1965 Second Circuit decision in Scenic Hudson Preservation Conference v. Federal Power Commission, are many bedrock concepts in environmental law that I think everybody in this room will recognize. Standing in court to protect nature, citizen suit legislation, the environmental impact statement process, and the balancing of economics with the preservation of scenic beauty and historic resources. The Lloyd K. Garrison Lecture celebrates the vision, public spirit, and life of this great attorney and aims to inspire all of those who choose to follow Lloyd Garrison's example. Professor Kysar, today you are joining an impressive list of distinguished lawyers, scholars, and leaders in the field of environmental law who have presented the Garrison Lecture on pressing and novel legal issues for more than 30 years. We look forward to hearing from you. And now for Professor Kysar's official introduction, Professor Galperin is going to return to the podium.
Okay, so I have over the years had a lot of opportunities to introduce people for various talks, but introducing Professor Doug Kysar is a special pleasure for me because Doug is a former colleague, a mentor, a friend, and most importantly, a big fan of New Haven Beats. I mention that for a particular reason. It's important because two of our Haub visiting scholars right now are New Haven pizza fans, Doug Kysar and also Randy Abate, who is back here, right up front. So Randy grew up in the New Haven area, and he and I discovered a few years ago that Professor Vithanage had never had New Haven a pizza. And so we decided to do a pizza crawl, the three of us and our partners. And it was an excellent success. And I think Professor Vithanage can now claim herself to also be a pizza fan. And I mention this because, Doug, we didn't invite you that time, but you are hereby officially invited to our next New Haven pizza crawl. Others in the room, maybe, we'll see. I can't get too big. Yep, it's very exclusive. The dean can come. So Doug and I first met about 15 years ago when he hired me and helped me transition from my professional career into academia, into clinical teaching, and then eventually from clinical teaching into doctrinal classroom teaching. And over those years, seeing Doug's teaching and his support for his students, his sincere kindness and the way he goes to bat for people, and his extremely impressive scholarship, they've all had a huge influence on me and how I do my job today. I will say more about Doug's scholarship in a moment, but one of the things that has impressed me about the scholarship isn't so much the scholarly side, because it is important and innovative and thorough. It's also often beautiful, particularly in its prose. And I think, Doug, I may have told you this before. I'm not sure, but he wrote an article with a student at the time, a student, now former student, some years ago called "Living with Owning." And I can say with confidence that that is the only law review article that has ever made me cry. This is true. This is not a joke. There's a passage in that piece in which Doug and Matt, his co-author, described this lion cowering beneath the front porch of a residential home before police officers come and shoot the lion to death. And it was incredibly moving for me. It is both beautiful prose and also really an important piece of the overall legal and ethical analysis that Matt and Doug did in that piece. I keep trying to find articles that will make me cry for reasons other than boredom, and it has not happened yet. So congratulations on that, Doug. So for Doug's work and his personal support, I really owe Doug a lot, including an introduction that is about him and not me. So I will move on to that point. So Doug Kysar, an Indiana native, an IU graduate, undergraduate, graduate, Harvard Law School graduate. He is now the Joseph M. Field Professor of Law at Yale Law School. He's been there for, I think, about 2 decades. He has, in addition to his scholarly work, he has shouldered a lot of very important leadership work at Yale. He just finished chairing the Dean Search Committee that helped select the new dean at Yale Law School. I think, was that your second Dean Search Committee? The second Dean Search Committee. So 2 deans in a row. That's hard work. He's also was on, at least on 2 occasions, the deputy dean, and I remember watching him in that role one time and thinking, this seems like a terrible job. And I vividly remember Doug saying, I will not do this ever again. And then you know what happened? He did it again. In the same vein of community service, I should also note that Doug's wife, Christine, was just elected to the New Haven Board of Alders, which is the city council in New Haven. So now he is also a political spouse, which I have no doubt comes with no end of new and occasionally unwelcome responsibilities. Doug is not just a tireless institutional leader. He's also, as I mentioned earlier, an incredible and incredibly well-regarded scholar. That his scholarship is both wide-ranging and very consistent in some important ways. It is wide-ranging because it covers a wide range of subjects, things like product liability and environmental law and animal law. But across that range of subjects, he's also keenly focused on key critical questions, things like risk regulation, responsibility, uncertainty, the limits of human knowledge. And while the couple of things we've written together are obviously the most important pieces of his work, Doug's book, Regulating from Nowhere, is perhaps a little bit more well known. And that book tackles issues that we often overlook in environmental law, even though they are central to environmental decision making. Things like, what is the role of responsibility in environmental law? How do we account for the voiceless? How do we make the meaning of our environmental choices more transparent? I also remember that sometime after first reading Doug's book, I also read this book called Priceless by Heinzerling and Ackerman. And I remember saying to Doug that I thought the books had a lot of similarities, and I really enjoyed both. But it was really interesting how Lisa Heinzerling and Frank Ackerman managed to write about cost-benefit analysis without ever once using the words deontology or teleology. And it was a sick burn on my part. But in truth, Doug's work in Regulating from Nowhere and his many articles and his book chapters, his work in this here is profound. And my joke about philosophical jargon actually points to what makes that work so important. Doug refuses to fall back on appealing but overly simplistic answers, and instead demands that his readers do the hard work of being complex humans in a complex world. So I, for one, am grateful for that charge, and I hope after hearing his talk today, you will all feel the same way. So I'm going to invite you up. There's one more thing I have to do before, who knows what. This is the slide I want. One more thing I have to do before turning the slides over to you, which is we have a whole gift bag here for you. But the most important thing in this bag is this, which is the medal that comes with the Garrison lecture. So let me present that to you, and then I just want to add, I want to make sure I get some of the right information here, because this medal that you have now, and which all of you can see on the screen here, this displays the topographical depiction of Storm King Mountain, paying homage to the landmark case that Lloyd K. Garrison won, which Dean Anderson told you about moments ago. This symbol that some of you will recognize also serves as the logo of the Pace Haub Environmental Law Program. So this award now bears Professor Kysar's name on the back, and I want to once again invite you to congratulate Doug and thank him for his forthcoming lecture. Okay. I wanted to do that. It makes me feel good.
So we started a little bit later than 5. Do you think we'll be able to go over, or should I try to cut things down? Okay, great. Wonderful. Well, so first, thanks Dean Anderson. Thanks to the entire Pace Law community for inviting me to spend time with you and to deliver this lecture. I'm really honored. And I'd like to express deep appreciation to Professor Galperin for serving as our kind of moderator and chair, and for being a dear friend and colleague to me for almost 15 years now. I'm grateful also to Lorraine and Annie and everybody else in the environmental law program team who worked really hard to plan this event. Finally, but perhaps most important, I'm grateful to all of you who came to hear this lecture despite the somewhat obscure title. I'm confident that the facts and ideas we will discuss tonight are relevant to all of us. Indeed, I believe they're a matter of utmost importance to the future of our planet and to the very identity of humanity as a moral species. Wait, that sounds pretty grandiose. Let me try a more modest note. The title of the lecture comes from a passage in T.S. Eliot's poem, The Rock, a passage that has always haunted me. I'll give you a moment to read it. The idea that we humans are prone to dreaming of systems so perfect that no one will need to be good puts me in mind of liberalism and capitalism and all the other isms that try to grant humans maximal space for self-determination and self-interest, while still somehow avoiding the nightmares that can result when we cease to see ourselves as connected, as interdependent, and as ultimately responsible for each other's flourishing, as well as the flourishing of other forms of life. Actually, now that I think about it, that also sounds pretty grandiose. Let me try one more time. The real inspiration for this lecture comes from my grandmother, Marie Wood. My grandma spent her entire 95 years in Shelby County, Indiana, in the middle of the United States. For most of those years, she lived on the same 17-acre farm that my mother now owns, and where my grandmother grew corn, soybeans, fruits, and vegetables, while also raising a variety of animals. Now, my grandmother loved to tell jokes, and one of her favorite jokes involved a newspaper reporter who's interviewing a farmer who's just experienced a windfall by winning the big lottery in the state. And the reporter asked the farmer, "What are you going to do with all this newfound wealth?" And the farmer says, "Farm until it's gone." A similar joke, also told by my grandmother, says, "How do you make $1 million farming? Start with 2 million." So both jokes upend the logic that's supposed to govern economic behavior. Rather than seeing farming as determined by economic incentives, the paramount value in these two jokes is stewardship of land and animals, whether or not the market will support it. Farmland in the US today, and in most other industrialized parts of the world, is no longer stewarded by people like my grandmother. When she was born in the early 20th century, ag took place on small, diversified farms. It was labor intensive, employing nearly half of the US workforce, not to mention millions of service animals. The transformation instead of agriculture into a highly industrialized, concentrated, monocultural system reverses the logic implied by those two jokes. The farmers in the two jokes were willing to accept economic failure in order to preserve their working relationship with their land and animals. Instead, the industrial animal agriculture system is willing to sacrifice both natural and human capital for short-term economic gain, even at the system's own long-term peril. No part of the global food system illustrates this dynamic, I think, more than industrial animal agriculture. So consider the fact that when US livestock slaughterhouses closed or operated at reduced capacity during COVID-19, consider the fact the meat industry was forced to, in their term, depopulate millions of livestock animals that could no longer be processed and brought to market. With animals strategically bred to have short growth cycles that take place within massive indoor facilities that house animals by the tens or even hundreds of thousands, pig and poultry farms simply could not cope with a processing backlog. More time alive for the animals would have meant more feed costs, more waste to contain, and even more intense and dangerous confinement as new animals continued to arrive. This throughput of animal lives in the global meat supply is staggering. In the US alone, nearly 19 billion land animals are slaughtered for food every year. Globally, an estimated 69 billion chickens, 1.5 billion pigs, and hundreds of millions of turkeys, sheep, goats, and cattle are slaughtered for food each year. Those numbers don't include the billions, even trillions of additional animals whose lives are devoted to egg, dairy, seafood, and fish production. And this expansion of animal agriculture has happened in rapid order, and no sign of slowing appears. Global meat consumption is projected to rise nearly 70% by 2050. In addition to this vastness, the animal agriculture industry also is remarkable for its consolidation. These market concentrations give meat firms significant influence over the supply chain and its policy context, a topic I'll return to in a few minutes. First, though, let's observe how the rise of industrial meat production has worked to transform our planet. And I mean that quite literally. Researchers estimate that today 96% of mammalian biomass consists of humans and animals devoted to human use and consumption. So put differently, of all mammals now alive on Earth, only 4% by weight are wild. 36% are human, and 60% are livestock and pets. These distributions signify massive declines in wild animal life from the time before intensive human agriculture and development. In short, humanity has re-engineered the tree of life to suit its purposes. And those billions of cattle, sheep, pigs, and poultry that we bring into and out of existence each year hold jarring consequences for the planet. For instance, in substantial part to grow livestock feed crops, humans have pumped and redistributed enough groundwater from beneath the Earth's surface to have literally shifted the planet's rotational pole. Our re-engineering of the tree of life has tilted the very planet it grows upon. Now, this highly industrialized way in which much of the world now produces meat generates a significant and diverse array of external costs. These costs affect most directly the people who consume meat. Worldwide, meat consumption per capita has grown significantly over the past 6 decades with a variety of attendant health consequences. A global average figure, though, obscures vast differences in national per capita meat consumption. In the US, people eat an average of 149 kilograms of meat per person per year. In India, the average is 14 kilograms. Researchers estimate that if we adopted a plant-rich diet that conforms to standard nutritional guidelines, 5 to 8 million premature deaths would be prevented each year worldwide. Industrial meat production implicates public health in ways that go beyond personal diet and nutrition. Zoonotic disease spread is tightly linked with animal agriculture, as is the problem of antimicrobial resistance. Humanity now faces what food systems scientist Matthew Hyatt calls an infectious disease trap due to the way we produce meat. With more and more land being cleared for livestock grazing and feed crops, the likelihood of disease spread increases. On the other hand, if land clearing is to be minimized through intensification of meat production, as is often recommended, other disease risks will be enhanced due to that increased confinement. From the farm to the slaughterhouse, workers in the meat supply chain are among the most physically endangered workers in the world. They often are also marginalized workers without power to negotiate for safer conditions. Farmers themselves fare little better. In 2022, the median household income from poultry farming in the US was negative $4,069. Hog farming produced negative $166. As a result, for the actual farmers doing the work of raising animals, their lives are often ones of financial precarity and psychological distress. A Pew Commission study concluded that industrialization draws wealth and life away from the very rural communities it purports to benefit, and which once thrived as a result of diverse and more sustainable forms of livestock production. In addition, living in a rural community near a confined animal facility is associated with a variety of environmental health and safety risks, including higher levels of mortality from cardiovascular disease, anemia, and kidney disease, as well as higher rates of asthma, bronchitis, infant mortality, anxiety, and depression. Animal agriculture is a leading driver of deforestation, species loss, and overuse of vital natural resources like groundwater and soil health. It also requires an artificial alteration of the Earth's nitrogen cycle through human production of fertilizers and pesticides. Some ecologists regard that as a global environmental threat on par with climate change. Speaking of climate change, depending on how you count, global meat production is responsible for 15% or more of annual greenhouse gas emissions. Researchers estimate if the world shifted to an entirely plant-based diet by 2050, we could stay within 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming, given the huge carbon storage potential that would be opened up by ecosystem restoration. Finally, there are the animals themselves. I'm not going to give you a detailed litany of the ways in which industrial animal agriculture constrains the lives of animals. Suffice it to say, the lives of animals within this system are not the flourishing ones they are capable of having. Okay. Enough of the parade of horribles. You guys are going to make me give the medal back. Taken together, these various externalities suggest that for animal agriculture today, the designations external and internal are misleading. that which is external may be more constitutive of the industry than that which is internal. In addition to prolific externalization of harm onto others, the industry also benefits from an uncanny ability to attract public subsidization and to avoid accountability. I'm going to summarize quickly in the interest of time. When slaughterhouse workers in the US requested personal protective equipment from their employers during the early stages of COVID, they were told at many facilities simply to pull their hairnets down over their nose and mouth. At the same time, the meat industry lobbied successfully, along with other businesses, for immunity from tort liability for COVID-related losses. So personal protective equipment was in scarce supply, even for healthcare workers on the front lines. But corporate protective equipment was amply provided through law. I want to assert that these liability shields are emblematic of the kinds of legal protections that industrial animal agriculture more widely enjoys. For an industry causally connected to a variety of severe, even planet-tilting consequences, meat and dairy production remains remarkably unregulated. That includes express or implied exemptions from labor and employment law. In the US, farm workers are not covered by the Fair Labor Standards Act or the National Labor Relations Act. And although the injury rate for farm workers is among the highest of any employment sector in the country, OSHA is not allowed to act on farms with 10 or fewer non-family workers. Given intense automation within these sectors, even massive facilities today operate with 10 or fewer employees. The result is a striking gap in workplace safety law. According to a recent analysis, workers are unprotected by federal labor law at 96% of the operations that hire people to produce pork, eggs, beef, poultry, and milk. 25 years ago, the great environmental law scholar J.B. Rule identified a glaring regulatory gap enjoyed by agriculture, a gap Rule called the vast anti-law of farms and the environment. That gap today is even wider. Knowledge of the environmental harms caused by industrial agriculture has strengthened and expanded, while the exemptions enjoyed by the industry have held strong. Farming is also exempted in the US from the Animal Welfare Act. It's only lightly touched at the federal level at the transport and slaughter stages. At the state level, criminal anti-cruelty statutes could, in theory, fill the vacuum, but they're riddled with complications and exemptions. What about tort law? A bedrock principle of the common law legal system is that individuals have a right of access to a substantive body of law that provides meaningful redress for wrongful injury. Beginning in the 70s and 80s, however, ag producers decided they wanted a different framework. As suburban sprawl put longstanding farmland in danger of being challenged in tort, the farm lobby went state by state to secure so-called right to farm laws. Most modestly, these laws sought to codify a coming to the nuisance defense to protect established farms from complaints by suburban newcomers. Over time, though, the ag sector expanded the laws to provide an ever-widening sphere of protection, including for massive animal facilities. Agriculture law expert Neil Hamilton explains this development turned the laws into a right to commit nuisance rather than a right to farm. That combination of agricultural exceptionalism in regulation and robust protection from tort law essentially opens an invitation to externalize that meat producers find difficult to resist. To protect that enviable position, the industry also invests in the passage of so-called ag-gag laws, which impose civil and even criminal penalties on what are otherwise standard practices for journalists, activists, and employee whistleblowers. Ag-gag laws are representative of a broader class of laws, including meat libel laws, strict meat labeling laws, that are all designed to quell criticism and stifle competition. So all of what we've discussed so far raises a puzzle. Industrial animal agriculture appears to impose harm on consumers, public health, workers, farmers, neighbors, ecosystems, animals, natural resources, and the stability of our climate. In some cases, these harms are immediate and devastating human consequence. In other cases, they raise questions that go to the heart of our moral character. In the particular case of climate change, the threatened harm runs even deeper to the very habitability of the planet. Yet somehow, despite this catalog of consequences, the industry has managed to not only largely avoid legal and political accountability, but to continue to benefit from massive levels of public subsidization across the globe. So what aspects of our thinking about law, politics, and economics helps this situation to persist? To address that question, I'll turn to familiar but still fruitful theoretical terrain. With two deceptively simple papers, The Nature of the Firm and The Problem of Social Cost, the legendary economist Ronald Coase exerted a profound influence over how we think about markets, law, and policy. Together, his papers offer a view of social ordering that depends heavily on private ownership and contracting, with a narrow or at least hesitant role for regulation. And the analytical engine driving both papers is his concept of transaction costs. Transaction costs influence whether and when actors will contract to exchange valuable entitlements, including entitlements granted through law. So when deciding how to obtain a factor of production, the entrepreneur faces a choice between bearing some portion of the transaction costs of contracting with an outside producer or investing in producing that needed factor internally within the context of an organization. That's how Coase explained the theory of the firm, the rise of organizations. I want to take Coase's insights further, even perhaps turn them upside down. To begin with, there's little reason to suppose that firms engage in decisions regarding internal and external organization only when it comes to value-creating factors of production. In The Nature of the Firm, Coase elegantly demonstrates firms will bring positive factors of production in-house when the management costs of doing it are outweighed by the transaction costs of getting it from outside. But what about the value-destroying consequences of production? Whether in the form of worker injuries, local air and water pollution, infectious disease, climate change, or otherwise, firms have obvious economic incentives to avoid taking financial or legal responsibility for the harmful impacts of their activities. Likewise, we can take Coase's famous Problem of Social Cost article farther by arguing that economic actors strategically invest in more than just allocating resources or even legal entitlements. They also invest in shaping the bargaining environment that determines who owns an entitlement and how they are able to value it. By investing in the acquisition of laws that allocate entitlements to meat producers rather than to the victims of negative externalities, those firms can alter the resulting valuations of the entitlements and even the outcome of what appears to be social welfare maximizing allocations of entitlements. So the upshot is that today's global meat industry exists because it has used law and policy to offload harms onto disempowered communities and to keep those communities disempowered. From undocumented slaughterhouse workers to climate change victims in Pakistan, to future generations without groundwater access, to billions of voiceless and voteless livestock animals, the harms of industrial meat production are concentrated among interests that hold little or no power. Economists in the neoclassical tradition often defend the profit motive as socially desirable, but they do so in terms that presume adherence by firms to baseline norms of law and ethics, as if those norms were somehow fixed and exogenous. This famous statement by Milton Friedman from 1970 is a good example. What happens, though, when the basic rules of the society become themselves a subject of profit maximization, rather than something taken as given by the actors who are supposed to maximize under the constraints of those rules? What happens when we recognize that actors intentionally invest in altering legal entitlements, bargaining positions, information access, the content of information, and all of the ensuing valuations that in turn are supposed to determine what is social welfare maximizing? Where do we go from there? Close examination of the industrial meat sector suggests that the power of law is more limited than even Coase or Friedman wished for it to be. Market actors today see investment in legal baselines and bargaining conditions as a profit center like any other factor of production. The basic rules of the society are not matters that can be taken for granted, as Coase and Friedman each in their own way hoped. The market instead is a creation of law and law cannot simply wait to be invoked only when the market is overburdened by transaction costs. The shape and character of the market depends first and always on law itself. Modern meat conglomerates already understand that, and they have used that possibility to construct a system of production that is as detrimental to society, nature, and the climate as it is insulated from accountability. Left unchecked, they will farm until we're gone. Okay. That's the gloomy conclusion to the first part of the lecture. It suggests nothing short of an entirely different global political economy is necessary to address the deleterious impacts of industrial animal agriculture. That's a tall order in any historical context, probably especially so in our present one. Conclusions like this have led my students over the years to give me the nickname Dougie Downer. But perhaps I'm being too pessimistic. After all, other thinkers who have studied modern meat production have come to believe that plant-based and cultivated meat products will eventually displace vast quantities of conventional meat consumption. Rather than argue for political and legal responses to the harms of industrial meat production, these thinkers say we should simply be supporting less harmful technological alternatives. And given the bleak legal and political landscape I just described, maybe these thinkers are onto something crucial. The book I'm featuring on this slide was released in February and was backed with endorsements from a large range of public intellectuals, including Jane Goodall, Peter Singer, Ezra Klein, George Church, Bill McKibben, Christiana Figueres, Kim Stanley Robinson. The book tells the tale of how over the last several years, billions of dollars of venture capital funding have poured into a number of biotech startups, all of whom promise to realize the dream of scaled-up meat production without the need for conventional livestock. Take, for instance, cultivated meat production, in which the scientists begin with a small sample of cells, usually stem cells that are harvested from an animal without needing to kill it. Those harvested cells are screened, selected, and multiplied to create a cell bank. The cells are then suspended in a culture medium within a large container called a bioreactor. In this controlled environment, the cells then naturally divide and multiply as they would inside an animal's body. Once the cells multiply enough, the mixture is adjusted to encourage the cells to differentiate into types of tissue like muscle and fat. If the end product is going to be unstructured, like ground meat or nuggets, the cells can just be harvested at that point. For a structured cut like a steak, an edible scaffold material is used to help the cells organize and grow into the desired shape. The goal of the whole process is to produce meat that is accepted by consumers as an adequate substitute for conventional meat and that eliminates the need to raise and slaughter whole animals. If fully realized, this alternative approach to meat production could carry enormous benefits for the environment, for the climate, for public health, not to mention for the billions of animal lives that would not need to be lived out under conditions of suffering. That's what I call the bottom-up approach. A different potential fix works from the top down, starting with whole animals, but seeking to recode their DNA in ways that address some of the concerns raised by conventional meat production. CRISPR and other advanced genome editing techniques are being widely experimented with and actively deployed to alter livestock genetics. Some of these alternatives may carry significant welfare benefits for the animals themselves. For instance, a major focus of research is to eliminate the need for agricultural practices like dehorning, castration, and tail docking, which are standard but painful practices in livestock production. If animals can be engineered to be hornless, to never enter puberty, or to lack tails from the birth, then these harmful practices could be eliminated. Researchers are also actively working on the development of heat-tolerant livestock in response to climate change. Simultaneously, they're exploring ways to alter the DNA of microbes in the rumen of cows to lower their methane emissions, which contribute to climate change. In short, the genomics revolution has arrived for industrial animal agriculture. Now, both the bottom-up and the top-down approaches to livestock transformation remain fairly nascent technologies, but they have already attracted a variety of legal and regulatory issues. Of the two, cultivated meat has provoked far more controversy, given that it represents a fundamentally disruptive technology, whereas gene editing can be absorbed by the global meat industry without significant alteration of their business model, and indeed with significant potential benefits to the industry from an economic, legal, and public relations perspective. As evidence for that claim, I would submit the remarkable fact that major agribusiness firms and their academic partners are actively utilizing what we call germline genetic engineering practices to enhance livestock animals. Germline editing involves altering the DNA of reproductive cells or DNA within an early embryo such that the change then becomes present in every cell of the resulting organism, so it's passed down to all future generations. Now, for humans, germline editing is strictly forbidden under a kind of tapestry of national laws and regional treaties and voluntary scientific moratoria. But for non-human animals, this practice is actively being undertaken within companies and research centers throughout the world, even on animals like monkeys that share a remarkable degree of genetic overlap with us. So what could explain this stark difference of consensus on the risks that are posed by the very same technology, depending merely on the species it aims to alter? Well, when we talk about humans, two major concerns raised by germline editing are first, that it might lead to unintended or off-target effects that would then be introduced into the human gene pool with unforeseen, irreversible, and potentially harmful effects. Second, there's a concern that it might lead to a slippery slope in which the technique is used not just for therapeutic benefit to alleviate a disease or a harmful genetic condition, but instead for enhancement purposes, potentially leading to a new regime of class-based genetic inequality. Now, the reasons these two concerns with respect to human germline and genetic engineering don't have purchase with regard to non-human engineering are illuminating. So first, with regard to off-target effects, scientists say they're confident any such risk could be contained because the edited animals would just be destroyed as soon as the unintended effect is identified. In other words, any non-human animal that undergoes germline engineering could be sacrificed for the larger good. A germline engineered human, on the other hand, would hold one of those inconvenient rights to life that would stymie efforts to contain the off-target gene spread. Second, with regard to the concern that germline engineering would open a slippery slope to enhancement and a kind of genetic arms race, scientists are confident that non-human animals are only going to be experimented upon with a clear purpose in mind that's of generally agreed upon societal benefit, like creating disease-resistant livestock, producing animal models for medical research, reducing animal suffering from specific conditions. I'm going to come back to that argument in a moment. The response just given, I think, overlooks the risk of a different slippery slope, one that tilts toward disenhancement rather than enhancement. When we turn to the topic of cultivated meat, on the other hand, the legal and regulatory landscape is far more contested and volatile. Jurisdictions like Singapore and Israel have taken the lead in encouraging startup technologies, regulatory approval, and even retail distribution. A variety of other jurisdictions around the world are choosing instead to outright ban the sale of cultivated meat. Another set of governments is choosing to regulate tightly the language with which cultivated meat products can be described and marketed. These are all examples of the possibility we discussed earlier, in which firms are investing in the creation and shaping of the very content of legal entitlements themselves, rather than only bargaining to exchange exogenously determined legal entitlements. Let me close, though, by bringing us back to the human tendency to dream of less combative systems, systems so perfect that no one needs to be good. Cultivated meat production seeks to create edible flesh from the bottom up, using animal cells and a growth medium, but not requiring raising and sacrificing of entire animals themselves. The assumption within the industry and within big segments of the animal welfare community is that so long as the initial animal cells are harvested in a humane way, most of the issues of animal mistreatment associated with modern meat production will be solved. Despite growing in a way that is molecularly identical to the growth of cells within a living animal, the cultured cells themselves are not taken by the animal welfare community to constitute a living being that requires protection. Animal welfare concerns also are being addressed from the top down. Specifically, some within the industry imagine a future in which advanced genome editing techniques alter livestock animals in ways that go far beyond the examples discussed earlier. Rather than merely eliminating features such as horns or tails that are inconvenient within a mass production system, this approach seeks to alter livestock animals such that their capacity for pain, for sentience, for cognition, for any other indicia of moral or legal standing is edited out. Now, that prospect may sound dystopian and far-fetched, but consider the fact that researchers already have attempted to intentionally breed blind chickens, so they exhibit less of the aggressive behaviors toward each other that complicate intense confinement. These approaches are known in the literature as ones seeking animal disenhancement, that is, intentional engineering of livestock animals such that they lack pain receptors or other biological indicators that might qualify them for our consideration. Whereas cultivated meat production seeks to create edible flesh from the bottom up, animal disenhancement works from the top down, using whole animals but attempting to strip away from them the qualities that are thought to give rise to ethical obligation or regard. Both approaches, though, aim to produce the same result: bare life, life that is radically instrumentalized for human convenience, life that is not life, but instead only material for human use, free of apparent moral consequence. It won't surprise you that I think these new animal kinds raise not just ontological questions regarding what they are, but also ethical questions regarding what they are owed. Josh dared me to use the word ontological today. So. We like to think that the former question, what are they, can answer the latter question, what do we owe them? But this is another way in which we dream of systems so perfect that no one will need to be good. My view is that the instrumentalization of non-human lives raises moral questions, even if somehow those lives play out completely free from pain and suffering. When a being is brought into and out of existence solely for the purpose of manufacturing protein, and its life is maximized toward that end alone, that being suffers the dignitary opportunity cost of not living the kind of life it is capable of living. In the aftermath of World War II, the philosopher Emmanuel Levinas reckoned with the moral wreckage around him by placing ethics at the foundation of thought rather than ontology. On his approach, we do not get to think about ethics, politics, or law with an understanding of ourselves and nature already in place. We are not autonomous individuals at the top of a chain of being, endowed with reason, language, and power, seeking out voluntary arrangements with only those other humans we deem worthy of joining our social compact. Instead, on Levinas's account, we emerge into existence by being called into a relationship of responsibility. Subjectivity begins as an awareness of an other who, in Levinas's words, individuates me in my responsibility for them. The face of that other issues a basic ask, do not kill me, and wakes us to a world in which we are already ethically obliged. Prior to that moment, our consciousness is simply the shared consciousness of life's infinite value. Afterward, we tend to deny infinite value and to instead endorse systems of thought and programs of decision that appear to rationalize life and death. That foundational call to responsibility issues from a human face that is yet not defined or narrowed by age, race, sex, gender, nationality, or any other limiting categorization. Perhaps the call issued too from forms of life that are not yet divided into species or arranged into a hierarchy of existence. Perhaps the call even issues from the forms of being that we bring into being, forms of life or near life that the world has never before seen. Our scientific agency creates them, but our ethical agency determines their fate. Without maintaining an openness to these pre-analytic calls for help, we risk losing the motivating force for seeking to regard and care for our others at all. Without allowing ourselves to be shot through by the possibility of others' suffering, ethics becomes susceptible to simple calculation, politics to rationalization, and even the most awful neglect and abuse to normalization. Regard for the other becomes a matter of finding the correct line of moral inclusion, the line that cannot be empirically doubted, rather than a matter of openly experiencing the pleas for help that cannot be denied. Okay, those thoughts are a little abstract and elusive. Maybe I can try to make them more concrete in Q&A. Let me close just on a more positive note. One winter when I was a kid, I was staying with my grandma at her farm when a very powerful ice storm began to strike. Darkness was setting in, so she and I bundled up in our warmest winter clothes and we rushed throughout her farmyard trying to bring in all of her animals inside the barn for safety. The next morning, we left the house to go check on all the animals, and we were alarmed to see one of her turkeys outside of the barn. It was completely encased in ice, still as a statue. And my grandmother's eyes, like they welled up with tears, but the rest of her body just sprang into action. And she picked up the frozen turkey in her arms and she brought it inside the house. And she told me to turn on the oven at very low heat. Now, I was really young at this point, but I knew enough to know you don't cook a turkey without plucking its feathers first, right? So what was she planning to do? Well, it turns out you can defrost a live turkey because I kid you not, that animal somehow survived this ordeal. For the rest of its life, it did have one wing permanently outstretched as it walked around the barnyard. But in most other ways, due to my grandmother's care, it lived a life of flourishing. Now, as you can imagine, that little minor miracle had a profound effect on me as a child. And I think it's fair to say all the ideas I've shared with you this evening are just attempts by me to work out things my grandmother already knew. So thank you for listening to us.